My name is Michael Tamblyn. I'm Executive Vice President of Content, Sales, and Merchandising for Kobo. We have about 50 minutes, and so in that time, we're going to talk about the most important 2 weeks in an ebook purchaser's life. We'll talk about 66 people in Moldova. We'll talk about LCD versus e-ink, iTunes as a gladiator arena. We will talk about Ruth Ann Norden, DRM and media rights, bear attacks. We will talk about the inevitability of the international, the beauty of the local, and the end of the beginning of ebook retail. And to do that, I should probably talk a little bit about Kobo. Kobo is a lot of things. It is a global ebook retailer. It is also an ebook retail solution for partner retailers. So we power other people's ebook offerings, like Borders in the United States, Indigo in Canada, Angus & Robertson in Australia, Whitcoulls in New Zealand. We are the provider, depending on the day, of the third most popular e-reading app for the iPhone. And so we stack up there against Apple with about 34,000 employees and $42 billion in sales, and Amazon with 24,000 employees and about $24 billion in sales, and then us with 120 employees and not quite $1 billion in revenue. We are also the first ebook store for BlackBerry. We were the first on-device ebook store for Android. We're the first e-ink device lower than $150 in the US. We were the first ebook store in the cloud, and have built into the organization a few basic principles that have held us in good stead as we have developed and grown in roughly the last sort of year and a half that Kobo has been around. It's a philosophy we've been able to stick to very consistently. We have this sense that there are great devices out there already that you can read on, that there will be more of them, that they will get better, that they will get cheaper, and that a reader should always be able to choose the right device for them, that reading will happen anywhere in the world. And we have this idea of your whole reading life always with you, that everything you bought, everything you read, everything you could want to read should be able to follow you around wherever you go. And that means that we have reading experiences on iPhone that allow you to both read and to share recommendations and communicate with your friends. We have reading experiences for BlackBerry, for Android, and Palm Pre. We have reading experiences for tablets and iPads, desktops and notebooks, and e-ink devices as well. And then we also allow books to move around through Adobe Digital Editions to Sony readers and Nooks and Coolers and all those other devices as well. We use DRM, which is tied to a user's account. And this ecosystem of reading and this focus on the idea of the reading life has allowed us to attract a very different, very interesting kind of reader. A reader who reads differently, and one that we're really sort of starting to understand for the first time. For example, we found that the readers that we have brought to us actually read more, or at least they buy more than the average bricks and mortar bookstore patron. So average bricks and mortar bookstore visitor buys about 1 book a month. The average bricks and mortar loyalty card holder, so someone who's paid their $10 to become part of the loyalty program for a retailer, buys about 2 books a month. And our average is about 2 books a month. The top quartile of customers from us are buying about 1 book a week. And they have a very interesting weekly routine. In the sense that when we look at purchase patterns over the course of a week, we can see that Mondays are kind of the doldrums of reading. Tuesdays are much better because Tuesdays are new release day. Most publishers drop their new releases on Tuesday. We promote them heavily. We see a big spike in sales on Tuesday. And then from Wednesday through to the weekend, we see a steady climb, with Sunday being the busiest day of the week, 40% higher on average than Monday. They also have a daily routine. Sales sort of begin for us in the run-up to lunchtime, and then there's a sort of steady climb as you get through commuting, and then it peaks right at bedtime. And so that's sort of 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, is actually the busiest time of day for us. And so there's lunch, and there's commute, and then there's the time before bed. And the time before bed is interesting because these are when people are purchasing. They are buying books. They are literally in bed with an iPhone, with a tablet, with an e-ink device. They've gotten to the end of one book and purchase and start another at a time when every bookstore is closed, when no one would otherwise be able to fulfill that purchase, that desire to purchase. So we are seeing people buying at new times because of digital reading. And morning is all about newspapers, is all about current events, and isn't a time when people tend to read a lot digitally, but that is the reason that we are starting to do a lot more with newspapers and periodicals coming out this month. These readers are building massive libraries, hundreds of books, and then often adding books from other places as well, figuring out how to serve them better, has us thinking a lot about what it means to be a bookseller, and more importantly, what it means to be a bookseller when the very idea of a book, when the very idea of a bookstore or a customer is changing. And this, of course, is just the latest in centuries of evolution in book retail. In the 18th and 19th centuries, unless you lived in a very big city, you really didn't have any choice over what kind of bookstore you went to. If your town had one, that's where you went. Bookstores at that time were all about location. They were the bookstore near where you lived. And then over time, bookstores began to differentiate based on the kinds of books they had, started to have more of an opinion about the books they carried. They became about inventory, but were to a certain degree constrained by size. And that essentially was the way that book retail operated until about the 1980s, when the era of large format retail began, and then success in bookselling became to a greater or lesser degree about selection. Suddenly you had physical bookstores with hundreds of thousands of titles in stock. And then for large bookstores, that's more or less been the status quo ever since. The fine-tuning and optimization of that selection while continuing to move into more geographical locations. If you were a small retailer, you were now no longer protected by location. You had to focus ever more closely on the needs and tastes of your community, or the niche that you served, or the personality of your store. So small became about curation. And right around the time that small retail was getting that figured out, 1995 comes around, we get into online book selling, selection expands again. Now there's 1 million titles available, shipping everywhere, and we move then from selection to optimizing data flow in online sales. How do we collect and capture information about customers that then turns into recommendation and decision support that leads to more sales? And now we have ebooks. And after a few false starts, we're now kind of seeing a similar pattern in ebooks to what we saw on the online side. A big push on selection, and so you see retailers claiming, we have 500,000 titles, we have 1.2 million titles, we have 2.2 million titles, and so there's an attendant numbers game on who has how many and how they're categorized. But what we're really talking about is an increasing aggregation of available digital content and an additional data flow around how e-reading can be tracked and how it can be turned into a better reading experience. But what else? Surely this is not just kind of a replay of online, but with digital product. And what we believe is that things are different yet again, that we're seeing the end of the beginning of ebook retailing, and we're coming into something new. Because now we are unconstrained by location and we are unconstrained by physical inventory. We have a selection that is expanding rapidly and being acquired and aggregated at a staggering rate. We have a flow of data about readers and how they read and how they behave that is as rich and as detailed as anything yet seen in the history of media consumption. We are shelfless for the first time in book retail in any sense. And this is taking us somewhere different. And what I'm really here to talk about is, what does a retailer do? What are the qualities that a retailer might need to have not to be left behind in this new state? And so I think we can take some basics for granted. All book retailers will have selection. All of them will be data-driven. But what else? How do you succeed, or how do you survive in this